Have you ever dreamed of a country where rivers write the history, where mountains rise like old guardians, and where every road seems to lead through time? Serbia stands at the meeting point of worlds, where east meets west and old empires left their mark. Fortresses still watch the rivers that once carried their ships. Beyond the ruins lies another story of quiet villages, clear lakes, and untouched forests. We'll travel through Serbia's landscapes of stone and water, from river fortresses to mountain lakes, discovering the country's quiet, enduring soul. In southwestern Serbia, Golija rises between the Ibar and Moravica rivers, a massif of dense forest, meadows, and scattered hamlets. The mountain stretches for more than 30 kilometers, its slopes covered with beech, fir, and spruce that form one of the largest forest zones in the Balkans. Mist often settles in the valleys, drifting through the trees before breaking into clear mountain air. Streams descend from the ridges into glacial lakes, such as Dajiko and Kosanin, their surfaces still and dark under the forest canopy. Wooden houses with steep roofs stand at the edge of clearings, surrounded by haystacks and grazing cattle. Fields open suddenly among the trees, bordered by stone walls and wildflowers. In winter, snow buries the forests, covering the roads and roofs until only the chimneys rise above the drifts. In summer, the meadows fill with color and the forest hums with insects and running water. From the highest peaks, the horizon stretches across layers of mountain ranges that fade into haze. On a ridge above Mokra Gora stands Drvengrad, a wooden village built between forested slopes and winding roads. It was created by filmmaker Amir Kusturica, designed as a living set and a real settlement at the same time. The village stretches along the ridge like an open film scene. Log houses, narrow lanes, and tiled roofs facing the peaks of Zlatibor and Stara. Every structure is built from pine and oak, fitted with steep roofs and small balconies that overlook the valleys. In the center stands a wooden church with a shingled spire. Beside it, a cinema, workshops, and a library. The streets bear names of artists, writers, and athletes from around the world, carved into wooden signs at each corner. Below the ridge, the Shargon 8 railway loops through tunnels and bridges, its old narrow-gauge trains still running across the mountain. Steam rises over the tracks before disappearing into forest and rock. High in the Stara Mountains, Zaovine Lake spreads through deep forested valleys near the border with Bosnia. The water fills a basin carved by steep ridges and limestone slopes, its surface shifting from emerald to blue with the light. Pines and beeches grow down to the edge, their reflections merging with the still water below. The lake was created by a dam on the Belgrade River, its reservoirs feeding a vast hydroelectric system hidden inside the mountain. Above the dam, winding roads climb toward villages scattered along the ridges. Wooden houses stand among orchards and pastures, smoke rising from chimneys that overlook the valley. Around the lake, trails cut through dense forest and descend toward quiet coves, where the water is clear enough to see the stone bottom. In the distance, Tara's peaks rise in soft layers, fading into haze. The air carries the scent of pine and cold river water. Wind moves across the surface and ripples run from shore to shore through a landscape where mountain, forest, and water exist in complete balance. On the western edge of Tara National Park, Banjska Stena overlooks one of the most dramatic views in Serbia. The viewpoint stands on a rocky cliff more than 1,000 meters above the Drina River, where the green water winds through the canyon far below. The drop is sheer, and the silence carries only the wind moving through pine trees that cling to the edge. From the platform, the valley opens in every direction, the forests of Tara behind, and across the river, the mountains of Bosnia fading into haze. In the early morning, mist fills the gorge, rising slowly as the sun reaches the cliffs. Deer paths cross the slopes nearby, and narrow trails lead through the forest toward Zaovine Lake, hidden beyond the ridges. At the junction of the Sava and Danube, Belgrade stands on layers of history and stone. Golubac Fortress crowns the ridge, its bastions overlooking the wide rivers, where barges, ferries, and bridges cross in constant motion. Cannons still line the walls, facing the water that once carried invading fleets. Beneath the fortress, old streets wind through the neighborhood of Dorchol, lined with low houses, worn steps, and traces of Ottoman courtyards. Across the rivers, New Belgrade stretches flat and modern. Wide boulevards, glass towers, and endless apartment blocks built on reclaimed marshland. Trams and buses run between the two banks, crossing bridges whose lights glow against the current at night. Between them lies Užice Golija, a long island turned into a lake, its shores filled with cyclists, swimmers, and floating cafes in summer heat. The city climbs upward into hills like Vračar and Zemun. Rise above tiled roofs, while narrow lanes drop suddenly toward the water. Markets spill into the streets with fruit, bread, and roasted seeds. Tara National Park covers a vast stretch of forest and mountain on the western edge of Serbia, near the Drina River. Its ridges rise sharply above deep valleys, their slopes covered in dense pine and fir. In some areas, the trees are centuries old, forming untouched stands where light barely reaches the ground. The air smells of resin and cold stone, and the forest carries the sound of distant water. Below the cliffs, the Drina curves through a narrow gorge, its green surface reflecting the walls of rock above. Villages cling to the hillsides, built from wood and stone, their roofs steep against heavy snow. Roads twist through the forest, crossing ridges that open suddenly to wide views of canyons and high plateaus. On the slopes of Mount Jadnovic, above the valley of the Lim River, lies Sopotnica, a hillside cut by springs, terraces, and waterfalls. The water bursts from the limestone ground in dozens of small streams that join and fall over moss-covered rock. The drops vary in height, some no more than a few meters, others forming clear vales that descend into narrow basins. Wooden bridges and stone steps cross between the cascades, linking patches of meadow and forest. The air is cool and damp, filled with the constant rush of falling water. Above the springs, the village of Sopotnica spreads across the slope, its wooden roofs and orchards overlooking the terraces below. From the upper paths, the waterfalls glimmer through the trees, and the sound of water carries far down the valley toward the Lim. On the northern bank of the Danube lies Novi Sad, a city built between the river and the low slopes of Fruška Gora. From the water, the Petrovaradin Fortress dominates the skyline, its walls and tunnels cut deep into yellow sandstone. The clock tower stands above the riverbank, its hands uneven on purpose, the minute hand long, so fishermen could see it from the far shore. Across the bridge, the old city unfolds in grids of pastel buildings, courtyards, and wide squares. The spire of the Name of Mary Church rises over Liberty Square, surrounded by cafes and tram lines that cut through streets of Baroque facades. The Danube shapes the rhythm of the city. Ferries cross between banks, and floating bars line the shore in summer. Downstream, sandbars and islands break the current, while behind them, the forested hills of Fruška Gora rise in the haze. The air carries the smell of water and dust from the plains. Formed by a dam on the Drina River, Perucac Lake stretches for more than 50 kilometers through a narrow mountain valley. The water follows the river's old course, pressed between cliffs and slopes covered in pine and beech. From the ridges above, the lake appears as a long green ribbon winding through forest and rock. The concrete dam stands near the village of Perucac, its turbines hidden inside the mountain. Wooden houses and small docks line the shore, and boats move slowly through the still water. The color shifts through the day, pale at dawn, deep emerald by afternoon, silver under the evening sky. On the northern side, steep trails climb toward the viewpoints of Stara National Park. From there, the surface of the lake lies far below, mirroring the cliffs and forests that close tightly around the Drina's course. At the edge of the northern plain, near the border with Hungary, stands Subotica, a city of wide streets, pastel facades, and ornate flowers. The land around it is flat and open, stretching into endless fields of wheat and sunflowers. From a distance, church spires and the city hall rise above the rooftops like bright markets on the horizon. Subotica's center is built in the Secession style, with curved balconies, colored tiles, and stained glass that shimmer in daylight. The city hall dominates the main square, its red roof and tall clock tower reflected in the pools of nearby fountains. Around it stands cafes, arcades, and old trams, moving slowly between blocks lined with carved windows and wrought iron gates. At the entrance to the Iron Gates Gorge, where the Danube narrows between steep cliffs, stands Golubac Fortress. The stone walls rise straight from the riverbank, their towers reflected in the slow green current below. Built in the 14th century, the fortress controlled one of the most important passages between Central Europe and the Balkans. Nine towers dominate the complex, linked by high ramparts that climb the rock in sharp angles. The outer walls once met the water, forming a barrier across the river's edge. Inside the fortress, narrow stairways and arched passages lead to courtyards and upper platforms that overlook the gorge. Across the river, the cliffs of the Romanian shore rise almost vertically, closing around the channel. Wind moves through the towers, and the sound of water echoes against the stone. Upstream, the Danube widens again, flowing past the remains of villages and the beginning of the Great Iron Gates Canyon. Užice stands deep in the valley of the Jetina River, enclosed by cliffs that rise almost vertically above the roofs. The city stretches along the river's narrow course, its streets climbing the slopes in sharp turns and terraces. Concrete buildings and bridges press against the rock walls, while the sound of the river runs through the center day and night. Above the gorge stands the old fortress, its ruined towers perched on a ridge of stone. Below it, the first hydroelectric power plant in the Balkans still operates, its brick facade and turbines preserved beside the river. Factories, rail lines, and warehouses fill the lower districts, while houses climb higher toward the ridges of Zlatibor and Tara. In the evenings, smoke from chimneys settles in the valley, drifting between cliffs lit by windows and streetlights. High in the Pešter Plateau, between the mountains of Jadovnik and Zlatar, lies Lake Zlatar. A long, narrow reservoir stretching through deep valleys of green pine and gray limestone. The water glimmers with shifting tones of blue and silver, curving around steep slopes that fall sharply to the shore. Small coves and peninsulas cut into the lake's edge, their outlines changing with the level of the water. The lake was formed by a dam on the Uvac River, its walls of concrete rising between cliffs where eagles circle in the air. Villages stand on the ridges above, with wooden roofs and hayfields overlooking the water. In summer, boats cross from cove to cove, and herds move along dusty tracks above the shore. On the western edge of the Serbian plain, Šabac stands along the banks of the Sava River. Along the embankment, barges and ferries move through slow brown water, while the old fortress remains on the opposite shore. Its eastern ramparts and stone bastions half buried by grass. The streets near the river hold traces of Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian rule, mixed with low houses, arcades, and wide squares built after the wars. Markets spread through the center in the mornings, filled with fruit, grain, and river fish. To the south, roads climb toward Ser Mountain, visible as a blue line above the fields. Along Serbia's eastern border with Bulgaria, Stara planina stretches in a long chain of ridges, cliffs, and narrow valleys. The mountain rises abruptly from the plains, its slopes covered in beech forest and alpine grasslands that reach toward rocky plateaus. Streams cut deep into the land, forming gorges that echo with water and wind. The park is crossed by peaks over 2,000 meters high, Midzor, Babin Zub, and Kapran, their summits marked by stone and open sky. In spring, snowmelt feeds countless streams that gather into rivers and waterfalls. The most famous among them, Bigar and Tupavica, falling from high cliffs surrounded by moss and ferns. Villages stand far apart on the slopes, their houses built of stone and timber, smoke rising from roofs in the cold mornings. Dirt roads twist through meadows and forests, passing herds and old wooden fences. At the foot of Drvengrad Gradina, near Užice, opens Potpecka Cave, one of the largest cave entrances in the Balkans. The arch rises more than 20 meters high, a perfect semicircle cut into gray limestone. From the entrance, a cold draft flows out, carrying the scent of stone and underground water. Inside, passages extend deep into the mountain. Chambers open in sequence, filled with stalactites, stalagmites, and columns shaped by centuries of dripping water. In some sections, the ceilings reach heights of several floors, while underground streams echo through narrow corridors. Above the cave, trails climb to viewpoints over the valley of the Jetinia River. From the ridge, the dark entrance is visible against the pale rock, a vast doorway leading into the interior of the mountain. In the valley of the Nishava River lies Niš, one of the oldest cities in the Balkans. Roads from the Morava and Vardar valleys meet here, forming a crossroads between Central Europe and the Aegean. Above the river stands the Ottoman fortress, its stone walls enclosing gates, barracks, and shaded courtyards. Around it, the modern city spreads in every direction. Markets, narrow streets, and broad boulevards filled with trams and traffic. Layers of history overlap in its center. Roman ruins beneath pavements, Byzantine walls behind shops, and memorials from wars scattered across the parks. In eastern Serbia, the Timok River flows north through low hills and farmland before reaching the Danube. Formed by the meeting of the White and Black Timok near Zaječar, it cuts a winding valley between the ridges of the Carpathians and the plains to the west. The banks are lined with willows, poplars, and stretches of farmland where the soil turns red in the sun. Near the border, the river forms the natural line between Serbia and Romania. Small bridges cross at narrow points, and villages stand on both sides, their houses facing the water. In spring, the current runs fast with mountain snowmelt. By summer, it moves slow and shallow through gravel beds and reeds. Downstream, the Timok joins the Danube near Negotin, disappearing into the broad, calm water that continues east toward the Iron Gates. Novi Pazar lies in a wide valley surrounded by the mountains of Golija, Rogozna, and Pešter. The Jošanica River runs through its center, crossed by low stone bridges and lined with narrow streets and markets. The city's layout still follows the pattern of an old Ottoman bazaar: wooden shops, tiled roofs, and courtyards filled with the sound of running water. Minarets rise above the roofs, visible from every direction. Near the center stands the Altun Alem Mosque, its single dome and slender tower, built in the 16th century. Around it, workshops sell leather, textiles, and carved wood, continuing trades that have lasted for centuries. Beyond the city, green hills rise toward the remains of Stari Ras and the Monastery of Sopotnica, both reminders of medieval Serbia. On the southern bank of the Danube, where the river widens into a broad plain, stands Smederevo Fortress. Built in the 15th century as the last capital of medieval Serbia, it forms a vast triangle of stone and water. Two sides meet the river, while the third faces the city, protected by towers linked with thick ramparts. The outer walls stretch for more than a kilometer, enclosing courtyards, barracks, and a citadel that once held the royal palace. The river laps directly against the foundations, its surface reflecting the sharp lines of towers that still guard the shoreline. Inside the fortress grounds, grass now grows over the ruins, and the outlines of streets and gates remain visible beneath the open sky. Barges pass close to the walls, following the same route that once carried armies, merchants, and exiles along the Danube's current. Along Serbia's central spine rises Kopaonik, a vast mountain range that stretches for more than 70 kilometers. Its ridges form a high plateau broken by deep valleys and gorges, with summits that stay covered in snow for months. Pines and spruces blanket the slopes, opening at higher altitudes into meadows where wind and light move freely across the ridgelines. The highest peak, Pančić's summit, stands over 2,000 meters above sea level, looking across endless folds of hills. Around it, the ground is marked by mineral springs and traces of old mines, reminders of the mountain's long history of settlement and extraction. At lower elevations, ski roads and chairlifts cut through the forest, linking small plateaus dotted with wooden houses and lodges. In summer, the snowfields turn to grass, and narrow trails follow the contours of streams that descend toward the plains. The Uvac River winds through a limestone plateau in southwestern Serbia, cutting deep canyons that twist in endless loops between steep cliffs. The water moves slowly, reflecting the green of pine forests and the pale stone walls that rise hundreds of meters above it. From the ridges, the river appears like a chain of silver coils, stretching across the landscape, its bends hidden by the folds of the terrain. The canyon lies within a protected reserve that shelters one of Europe's last colonies of griffon vultures. The birds circle above the cliffs, their wings catching the light as they glide on the warm air rising from the rocks. Below, the silence is broken only by the echo of water against the canyon walls. Artificial lakes formed by dams Uvaco, Zlatarsko, and Rudinsko follow the river's ancient course, their surfaces still and narrow between the ridges. Small wooden boats move along the curves, disappearing behind each bend as the canyon tightens again into stone and shadow. Zlatibor stretches across a high plateau in western Serbia, between the valleys of the Jetinja and Uvac rivers. The land rolls in long, open slopes, covered with grass and pine, its ridges rarely broken by cliffs or forest. The light here is sharp and clear. Wind moves constantly across the hills, carrying the scent of resin and dry earth. Villages and mountain farms lie scattered across the plateau, their wooden roofs darkened by sun and snow. Between them, pastures spread for kilometers, crossed by fences and narrow roads that follow the curves of the terrain. Herds graze on the open fields through summer, and the sound of cowbells travels far in the thin air. On the slopes above Tornik, the highest peak, chairlifts and ski tracks cut through the pine forest. Below them, meadows turn golden in late afternoon light. Streams flow toward the valleys, feeding lakes and small rivers that wind through the foothills. Just below the slopes of Zlatibor, Ribnicko Lake lies between pine-covered ridges and open meadows. The reservoir was formed by a dam on the Rtaň River, its still surface following the natural curves of the valley. The water reflects the forests and scattered houses that line the hillsides, turning deep green in shadow and silver under the sun. A narrow road traces the shoreline, passing wooden cottages, grazing fields, and quiet inlets where reeds move with the wind. Small boats rest on the shore, and fishermen wait along the banks in early morning mist. In winter, frost settles on the trees, and thin ice forms at the edges where streams flow into the lake. In eastern Serbia, rising alone above the plains, stands Rtanj, a mountain whose sharp triangular peak dominates the horizon. Its slopes rise abruptly from the surrounding farmland, covered with beech forest that thins into bare rock near the summit. The highest point, Šabac, reaches just over 1,500 meters, its slopes meeting at angles so regular they give the mountain its pyramid form. Paths climb from villages at the base through meadows and forest, winding over ridges where wind sweeps constantly from the valleys. From the top, the land spreads in every direction, toward the Carpathians in the north and the plains of the Morava in the west. Caves and springs emerge on the lower slopes, where limestone channels carry cold water through the rock. In summer, the air smells of herbs that grow across the mountain, and the silence holds except for the wind moving over stone. Čačak lies in the valley of the West Morava River, enclosed by the mountains of Ovčar and Kablar. The city spreads along the riverbank, where bridges connect its districts and the sound of water carries through the streets. Above the western edge, cliffs rise sharply, their slopes cut by the Ovčar Kablar Gorge, a narrow passage filled with forests and monasteries hidden among the rocks. The city center follows straight boulevards lined with linden trees and low buildings. Markets and small workshops fill the old quarters, while factories and warehouses stretch toward the plains. Roads from here lead in every direction, north toward Kraljevo, west to Užice, and south across the mountain passes. At dusk, the hills close around the valley, and the lights of the city follow the curves of the river below the dark ridges. At the junction of the Ibar and West Morava rivers lies Kraljevo, a city shaped by crossings and borders. Roads from the north, south, and west meet here, linking the Šumadija plains with the mountains of Raška and Studenica. The land around the city is open and fertile, broken by low ridges and river islands. In the center stands the Zika Monastery, its red walls rising behind groves of cypress and oak. Built in the early 13th century, it once crowned the coronations of medieval kings, whose footsteps gave the city its name. Nearby, bridges span the Morava, connecting markets, apartment blocks, and industrial zones that line both banks. To the south, the valley narrows toward the slopes of Goats and Stolovi. Forests close in around the river, and the roads begin to climb, leaving behind the city that still marks the meeting point of the lowlands and the mountains. Hidden in a forested valley near Despotovac, Manasia Monastery rises behind high stone walls and defensive towers. Built in the early 15th century by despot Stefan Lazarevich, it stands as both a fortress and a sanctuary. The outer walls form a rectangle of heavy limestone, strengthened by 11 towers, connected with ramparts and walkways. At the center stands the Church of the Holy Trinity, its tall dome and carved windows rising above the courtyard. Inside, faded frescoes still cover the walls, scenes of saints, battles, and kings, painted in deep blue and gold. Beyond the gates, the sound of the Rizava River echoes from the gorge below, and the forest closes tightly around the complex. The stone towers remain watchful over the valley, the same walls that once guarded monks, soldiers, and the memory of a medieval court. Just north of Subotica lies Lake Polic, a shallow expanse of water surrounded by parks, promenades, and Art Nouveau pavilions. The lake stretches for nearly 5 kilometers, bordered by reed beds and low trees that move with the wind. Wooden piers reach into the water, where boats and swans drift close to the shore. At the turn of the 20th century, Polic became a spa and summer resort. The buildings that line its promenades still carry the ornate curves and colored tiles of the Secession style. Towers, balconies, and carved wooden arches reflected in the water. Paths connect the old water tower, the grand terrace, and the music pavilion shaded by linden trees. In the evenings, the surface of the lake turns gold, broken only by ripples from passing birds and the slow movement of air across the plains. Piro lies in a wide basin along the Nešava River, surrounded by the ridges of Stara planina. The city grew beside an old trading route that once linked the Morava Valley with Sofia and the Black Sea. On the northern bank stand the remains of the medieval fortress, its square towers rising above the riverbed. The streets of the old quarter are lined with low houses and tiled roofs, their courtyards shaded by walnut and cherry trees. Workshops still weave the famous Piro carpets, thick wool patterns in red, blue, and black, that have carried the city's name for centuries. To the east, the land rises quickly into forest and rock. Roads climb toward mountain villages, where wooden fences trace the slopes, and the air carries the smell of hay and cold river water flowing from Stara planina. Radan Mountain rises between the valleys of the Toplica and Jablanica rivers in southern Serbia. Its slopes are covered with oak and beech forests, cut by streams and narrow roads that wind toward quiet villages. The terrain is rough and uneven, shaped by old volcanic rock that gives the soil its deep red color. On the southern side stands Javoja Varosh, a cluster of stone pillars formed by erosion, some capped with heavy rocks balanced like heads. Steam and mineral springs run nearby, leaving white streaks on the ground. From the higher ridges, the view opens toward the plains of Leskovac and the distant line of Prokletia. The air carries the scent of wood smoke and pine, and the slopes fade into shadow long before the valleys below. In eastern Serbia, near Bor and the Timok Valley, rises Veliki Krš, a long limestone ridge that cuts sharply above the surrounding hills. The mountain stretches for about 10 kilometers, its slopes covered in forest that thins into bare white stone near the crest. From a distance, the ridge looks serrated, each peak standing like a blade against the sky. Trails climb steeply through beech and hornbeam before breaking out onto the rocky spine. The path follows the ridge, narrow and uneven, with drops on both sides and wide views across the Timok Basin. In spring, the slopes are covered with wildflowers. In summer, the stone radiates heat, and the air carries the scent of dry grass and pine. Beyond the summit, the terrain falls away toward valleys and villages, while the jagged line of Veliki Krš continues toward Mali Krš and Stol on the horizon. Kom Monastery stands on a wooded hill above Lake Skadar. surrounded by reeds and water on 3 sides. It was built in the early 15th century by members of the Balshik noble family, its church dedicated to the Dormition of the Virgin. The walls are made of pale stone, fitted tightly without ornament, their small windows opening toward the lake. A narrow path climbs from the shore to the monastery gate. Inside the courtyard, grass grows between flagstones, and the air smells of pine and damp earth. Faded frescoes still cover the interior, saints and kings painted in deep blues and ochres, lit by the thin light that filters through the dome. From the hill, the lake stretches wide and still, its surface broken only by reeds and the flight of birds. North of Bor rises Stol, a limestone mountain whose flat summit and steep slopes make it one of the most recognizable peaks in eastern Serbia. The mountain reaches just over 1,100 meters, its upper ridges bare and gray against the forests below. From a distance, the cliffs form a wall of stone that catches the light from dawn until late afternoon. Trails climb sharply through beech and oak before reaching open grass and rock. The final ascent leads across a narrow ridge with deep drops on both sides and views stretching toward Veliki Krš in the Timok Valley. Caves and cracks mark the cliffs where the wind whistles through the stone. Serbia is bold, untamed, and steeped in history. Where mountain rivers carve deep gorges, monasteries guard silent valleys, and fortresses rise above the Great Danube. If this journey through Serbia inspired you, hit subscribe. There are many more places waiting to be explored.